Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's web debate. The topic is training cyber diplomats, tools, gaps, and opportunities. This is actually our 50th web debate, 5-0. And I don't think there's any better way to kind of celebrate this anniversary by talking about cyber diplomacy and by talking about how to prepare diplomats, in particular, the next generation of diplomats, to become effective cyber diplomats, and to kind of look at what trainings, what capacity development opportunities are out there, what needs are there, and perhaps what opportunities, but also gaps are still there. So I'm really excited about this discussion. My name is Katharina Höhne. I'm the Director of Research at DiploFoundation, and I will moderate this debate. We have a lot to discuss. So basically what I want to do is just introduce our speakers straight away. So we have with us, and it's a great pleasure to have him, Mr. Ian Wallace. He's the chair of the Strategy and Policy Working Group of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, GFCE, and he is a senior advisor for cybersecurity policy to the Office of the Coordinator for Cyber Issues at the US State Department. Welcome, Ian. We have with us Dr. Stephanie Borsch-Pseiler, who is the Director for Digital Policy at DiploFoundation. And last but not least, we have Ms. Marilia Maciel. She is a digital policy senior researcher also at DiploFoundation. Before I start by asking them to share their wealth of expertise and experience, I would like to remind you, our audience, that we're trying to make this debate as interactive as possible. So as always, this means that we're looking for your questions, your comments, your debates in the chat here or streaming on YouTube and Facebook. My colleague, Andriana Gavrilovic, will support me in kind of looking at all the questions and comments that are coming in and in bringing these questions and comments back to our speakers. So please don't hold back. For us, the most important thing is really to get into this dialogue with you. Speaking of dialogue, let me start with my first question, and it's a kind of an obvious question. It goes to Ian. And Ian, what I would like to ask you, kind of building on your experience, is what do we actually mean by cyber diplomacy? How would you describe it? And what does it entail?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. Thank you, DiploFoundation. This is a fantastic forum, fantastic opportunity to speak to everyone. And right up front, I'd also like to congratulate Diplo and Stephanie and Marilia on a fantastic report that we're going to hear a bit more about. And for reasons that I will hopefully illuminate, this is a really important topic, and I'm excited for this opportunity to talk about it. Cyber diplomacy, to my mind, is really nothing more than the activity or the profession or the action of diplomacy, but particularly with regard to issues relating to computers, to IT, and especially how states relate to one another in cyberspace. Now, the challenge, of course, is that cyberspace is a relatively new creation, certainly in relation to diplomacy, and requires, or at least is perceived to require, additional expertise, sometimes technical expertise, sometimes other kind of expertise, which basically serves as a barrier to entry and means that as technology and information systems are increasingly important in our day-to-day lives because of the convergence between online systems and physical systems, and increasingly relevant to relations between states, we need a group of people who can understand what those issues are about, and often have enough appreciation and understanding of that technology to know when the normal rules of diplomacy that we've lived with for hundreds and thousands of years continue to be important, and that while technology changes the flavor of those discussions, it doesn't necessarily, in many cases, doesn't really change the fundamental truths that underpin the way that we do diplomacy. And so what is important, I think, in this discussion is building the capacity of countries around the world to engage in cyber diplomacy and not be intimidated from those discussions. For the last decade or so, a number of countries have started to stand up their own teams that are specifically focused in this area. The United States, the team that I work in, was established just over 10 years ago. Was the first cyber coordinator in a foreign ministry is Chris Painter, who now leads the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. And in the last decade, we've seen about 20 different teams spring up in foreign ministries around the world. But you don't necessarily have to have a team dedicated to this to engage in cyber diplomacy. And I think what we're beginning to see is a group of people in a much wider range of countries who are entering this space, but still a big opportunity for more people to come in and engage in these discussions. Just to answer the second part of your question, what does cyber diplomacy involve? I kind of see it vaguely broken down. You can do it in lots of different ways, but you might break it down into three areas. First, the sort of high diplomacy, multilateral diplomacy, sort of diplomacy that we see in the United Nations and regional fora, such as the OSCE and the OAS, where really we focus on the big issues of diplomacy that we've seen for years, including sort of avoiding wars and avoiding conflict between nations. And we've had some real breakthroughs in the last year where a decade or more's work to develop a framework of responsible behavior in cyberspace has been reinforced by agreements from the group of governmental experts and the open-ended working group. And now we have a real opportunity for even more diplomacy to socialize and reinforce that framework and what it stands for. And then we have got another category, which I kind of think of as sort of cyber diplomacy, where because cyber issues are so relevant to almost everything we do these days, that bilateral diplomacy, the normal business of international relations between countries, are increasingly having a dimension that affects information systems, and understanding how, and in some cases how not, to include those cyber issues in those discussions is an important strand which requires a degree of expertise and knowledge. And then the third area, I think, is having the expertise to go out into the world and engage with other countries to ask for help, either in the short term in a crisis. It's a networked world, and having the capacity to work with other countries to manage cyber threats is going to be increasingly important. But also when you realize that you haven't got the capacity you need, to have the expertise to go out and ask for it. And so building the sort of diplomatic knowledge and know-how to engage in those debates, including with organizations like the one that I work for, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, which was established in 2015, literally as an organization to bring together people from countries, private sector companies, NGOs from around the world, to work together, to collaborate, to coordinate, to build capacity, and increasingly building the capacity of diplomats to engage in these discussions so that they can ask for the help that they need is an increasingly important component of that. And then, the fact that this report was commissioned by the GFC is a recognition that we're now getting to a point of maturity where cyber diplomacy is right at the center of both the cyber capacity building world but also the work of diplomats more generally.
Thank you so much, Ian. I think one of the most important points that I take away from what you just said is actually two. A, being able to ask the right kind of questions, and B, that even if you're not officially called cyber diplomat, you might actually be a cyber diplomat, or you're engaging in cyber issues. This is becoming almost an inevitability. And that brings us to basically the important point. How do we prepare diplomats for this new world? How do we do capacity development? What options are out there, and how can they be even improved, perhaps? And you already hinted at, my colleague Stephanie is working on a study on cyber diplomacy capacity development, mandated by the GFCE. And today kind of serves as the launch of part of this study. We'll put the link to the study in the chat here, so you can already have a look, a sneak peek. But more importantly, Steph, over to you to kind of introduce us to your work and how this study came about and how you started researching this topic.
Thank you, Kat, and hello, everyone. It's good to be here. Yes, as both Ian and Katarina were saying, this was a knowledge gap identified by one of the task forces of the GSE. So it's already recognition of the good work that the GFC is doing. And of course, Diplo was very happy to undertake this study, given its, let's say, its track record in both in the capacity development and also in cyber diplomacy itself as a topic. And I should also mention that the study was sponsored by the Government of Canada. And at this point, I should also thank all the participants, all the cyber diplomacy practitioners, in case you do not call yourself officially a cyber diplomat, but you may still be a practitioner, who took part in the survey and who helped us bounce off ideas about the needs and the gaps. So as we've been saying, this study is taking things a notch deeper, and it looks at what the training and tools available out there, what they are, how widely used they are, what's missing, and what are the good practices that we can borrow from other communities of practice. And in fact, in the slide you see, I've just very quickly outlined the process that the study takes on. It's really looking, as a starting point, we've looked at what is out there in terms of the training opportunities, but not just the courses, the training, but also the tools, any useful websites, any resources that can help the practitioners. So this was asking what is out there was our first step there. The second step was actually, because that's also part of the study that has been published, was taking a look at the existing training and the tools. And by the way, the database is included in the study that was published. So we've asked the practitioners how widely used are the training and how widely used are the tools that are available out there. In an ideal world, you'd want the training and the tools to be used as widely as possible. But in reality, that is not the case. So the next logical question for us was to see why there is the gap between what is out there and the take-up. And apologies for the background noise. And also, what can we learn from other communities of practice in terms of I wouldn't say best practice because it's difficult to say what is best for the cyber diplomacy, but I'd say good practices. So based on the gaps, what can we learn from other communities, and what can we bring into the environment of cyber diplomacy? And that leads us to the recommendations. So what will follow after this study is actually the publication of the case studies that we have and the recommendations. They're shaping very nicely at the moment. So the aim even of this discussion is to also brainstorm a little bit on the findings and what the colleagues here in the Zoom room think can be helpful or otherwise, your experiences in general. So, Kat, that is in a nutshell the process involved in this cyber diplomacy capacity development study.
Thank you so much for this overview. And I would just like to underscore, so the link to the study is in the chat, so please have a look. I'm also really excited by the fact that you are sharing some of the data from the study in this first part of the study. I think this is really important and also really helpful to everyone interested in this. And also let me underscore what you just said. We're really looking for your comments and experience. So please put them in the chat, because all of that we can then bring together, for example, in the summary to this debate, and kind of build further on this knowledge and start building more and more collective knowledge around this. But Steph, I would also perhaps like to push you a little bit more and kind of ask you what are some of your findings? So I think you alluded to it. You alluded to some of the gaps there. But can you share a little bit more? Because I think it's very useful as people then go and actually read the study, so they have a bit of an orientation of some of your findings. So over to you.
Sure, Kat. Actually, we asked via a survey, we asked our survey participants lots of questions in order to determine really what the take-up is and where the gaps are. And I can share, let's say, the three main findings. There are several more detailed in the study, but I'll share the three main findings, and especially the first finding, which to me personally, it came a little bit of a surprise, and this is the following. So the main reason why the cyber diplomacy practitioners do not take training or do not take further training is because they are unaware of the training opportunities out there, despite the fact that many of them are public. They're online, and you can search for them. So the lack of awareness is, as you can see on the slide, it's essentially the yellow part. Not saying that all the respondents said they were unaware of the opportunities, of course, but it was let's say, the largest reason why there was a gap between availability of courses and their take-up. I found it personally surprising because we're living in an age of constant communications, right? So we're constantly bombarded by messages, by emails, by adverts on social media, by messages that we see on various online spaces, and yet a lot of the practitioners are unaware of some of the study opportunities, training opportunities out there, and that to me was a surprise. I would have thought personally that it would have been less of an issue, and I would have thought that the main issue was lack of funding. In reality, the issue of funding came as a second main reason, so it's still there, but in the list, in the hierarchy, is the second reason why practitioners do not take up either training in general or further training. This is not a surprise. Some of the courses are expensive. And you can't really compare the ability of practitioners from developing countries, for instance, to take up training when certain courses, certain training cost as much as large fractions of one's salary. So it's the reason there is obvious. There are a lot of scholarships also available, so that does help with the ability to take further training, but still, it's still an issue there. And the third finding is the lack of time. This again is not a surprise. We're all incredibly busy, so I think it's a problem that every practitioner, every professional, actually. So it's not just cyber diplomats. Every professional faces this challenge of juggling work and study and training. Now, as Ian was saying, certain issues related to cyber diplomacy, they require expertise. So the training is an essential part of one's work in cyber diplomacy, which means that there must be, a practitioner must be able to find, ideally, time within the working hours to take on the training. And this is probably requires the largest shift in the organizational culture that, and this is based also on the respondents, it requires the largest shift in terms of helping the practitioners identify time within their weekly schedule where they can dedicate to training. It's not easy, of course, and this is one of the, we will address this in the recommendations, but essentially these are the three main findings. So again, lack of awareness and lack of time, those I would say are the easier, in inverted commas, to address, and then lack of funding, second main reason. It is more complex to resolve because it relies unavoidably on the involvement of funders. So that's in brief our findings, much more in the study which has been published, and yeah, we look forward to comments on those findings.
Exactly. I really enjoyed listening to you. Some not so surprising findings, some surprising findings, and especially when you mentioned this question about, do we need a shift in the organizational culture, in the approach towards learning and training on the job? I think that's a really interesting question that I would like to get back to later. And I think this is an ideal moment to bring my colleague Marilia into the conversation. And I'm really excited about this because Marilia is involved on the practical side in terms of delivering capacity development, in particular in the area of e-commerce, but she also kind of researches this area. So for example, last year, she did a study on internet governance capacity development with a focus on African countries. So with all of that in mind, I'm really interested to hear your perspective, Marilia. So what Stephanie just told us from this recent study, does this resonate with you? Is this something you also see in practice? And then going back to your study regarding capacity development in IG in African countries, do you see that reflected there? And perhaps can you give us some practical examples from your experience?
Thank you, Kat. Actually, I would like to create a dialogue with this publication and the research conducted by Steph, which is an excellent research. I think that we need a lot more information on cyber capacity building to be able to understand what is meaningful to people who are out there who want to receive capacity building in this area, what is already available and what gaps we can fill. And this research helped us to do exactly that. I conducted two researches that I think relate to this one. As you mentioned, the research that was published in the beginning of this year with the support from the African Union was a research that looked at what is available in terms of capacity building on internet governance in Africa. The idea was to identify elements that would help the African Union put together a strategic action plan to enhance sustainability of capacity building in the continent. So in that sense, we had a broader approach because we were not looking at cyber security or cyber diplomacy. We were looking at internet governance, which is much broader, but we also had a more focused approach because we're looking at a continent specifically. But in terms of methodology, there were a lot of similarities. We conducted desk research, surveys, and interviews. So I think that there are some correlations that we can make here. The first of them that I find very interesting is that something that we found out in our research was that the expression internet governance was not very easy in terms of galvanizing actors around it. So for instance, capacity building that we would normally understand as being capacity building on internet governance, such as capacity building on how intellectual property affects digital content, or capacity building on technical infrastructure, was something that the actors themselves didn't see that they were providing capacity building on internet governance. They said, I'm doing intellectual property, I'm doing infrastructure, I'm not doing internet governance. That expression doesn't resonate with me. And I wonder if the same does not happen for cyber capacity building, which I think is an expression that is clear for those who are already involved in this area, but perhaps not for people who are not doing it in the everyday. So if you are looking for capacity building on cybersecurity, you want to know more about cyber norms, will you type on Google, I want courses on cyber diplomacy? Perhaps the expression will not ring any bells. So we need to see if one of the reasons why people don't have enough information is if this expression rallies enough stakeholders around it. The other finding that we came across that also dialogues with what Stephanie came across in her study is the lack of awareness. And I think that although we are in an information overload, information on capacity building is still very sparse and many times unclear. There's not a one-stop shop that we can go to see what is available out there. You need to be part of certain networks to be able to know which are the providers of capacity building, which providers are actually reliable providers. We also came across a lot of initiatives that provided incomplete information on syllables, on what is covered. So it's hard for individuals to tell apart what is serious capacity building and what is out there. And I think that one of the suggestions that we made in our report was that this one-stop shop would be really necessary. And I know that GFC has been working on that on the SciView portal. And I think that this one-stop shop does help actors to find information that they want to find. In terms of time to take the courses, this was not a specific question that we asked in this research. However, as you mentioned, I am running a course on e-commerce, which is dedicated to diplomats who work on the WTO on trade issues. So you imagine these guys are doing at the same time e-commerce, fisheries. It's an extremely busy file for diplomats when they are focused on trade. And what was interesting to me is that, first of all, we had many diplomats that took the course, but they were lower ranked diplomats. Of course, they convinced their peers to take the course as well, but it seems to me that higher ranked diplomats do not have much time to take the course. However, the diplomats that took the course, when we asked them to assess if the workload was adequate to their working schedule or not, they said it was okay. They managed to do it. And one of the reasons why is that online courses give you the flexibility to work at your own pace, at your own schedule, when you have the time to access the course platform. So the online characteristic, I think, gives an additional flexibility, and perhaps diplomats, if they overcome the resistance of, say, I don't have enough time, they would see that actually it is feasible to do it. And Stephanie touches a very important point, which is support from hierarchy. I think there is much more clearness in terms of people understanding that capacity building on internet governance is a stepping stone to advance on their careers. So many of the people that we interviewed saw that I want to take this course, I want to take capacity building because I know that I can move forward and progress on my work, on my job. And I am not sure if this is clear as well for cyber diplomats. So this is a message that needs to be flagged by hierarchy in terms of supporting people, encouraging people, and that comes hand in hand with the funding as well. There's a problem with regards to funding from the side of providers of capacity building, and in Africa that was a stumbling block because many people would like to provide capacity building, but they couldn't find a financial support to organize courses. But there is the financial constraints on the side of those who are taking the courses. And many times high quality courses are paid. So the institutional culture that would provide financial support would be important as well. And this is something that we also found out in our research. So I think these are the main points. And I think that that dialogues with what Stephanie found. So it's two different topics. Perhaps the broadness is different, but the findings were not that dissimilar. So that corroborates the research that Stephanie has done on cyber capacity development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Super insightful. So I'm not going to attempt to summarize. Just one small point that really resonated with me when you brought in this question. How are you going to Google this? So how do you find the relevant information, and how can you type this into Google to actually find the courses you're looking for? Perhaps also this distinction between online training and face-to-face training and the different opportunities that each offer is something worth underscoring. But I want to get back to Ian actually for his reflections on this kind of mass of advice and information and insight that we just heard. Ian, from your perspective, what would you highlight and what resonates with you from where you are standing?
First of all, I want to say thank you very much again, both to Stephanie and Marilia. I think what they have helped highlight some of the challenges in this space, but also, which is not always the case with research, and certainly with cyber research, highlighted some of the opportunities that we have going forward. I mean, the first thing I want to say is I think this is a fairly optimistic story. There is definitely, if you are a diplomat and you're interested in engaging in this space, or you're interested in your country becoming more knowledgeable about cyber issues, there are definitely resources available. I think over time, we're beginning to see more and more courses become available. I also think that there are increasing number of organizations, both countries, but also private sector nonprofits who are seeing the importance of cyber diplomacy and investing in courses. And Stephanie mentioned that there are sort of fellowships out there. I also think that there are a greater awareness of these issues in communities of practice that perhaps haven't prioritized cyber issues in the past. So, for example, the World Bank has just set up a multi-donor trust fund, which I think offers the opportunity to bring sort of cyber issues to the international development community, which in turn, I think, will encourage foreign ministries to invest more time and effort into this and give it a higher priority. What I would say, though, is that aside from the training and the growing of diplomats, one of the biggest challenges in this space, which has been mentioned, but I want to give it a little more prominence, is having the information available to use that training and knowledge. As Marilia mentioned, my organization, the Global Forum Cyber Expertise, very much recognizes the fact that to be effective, not just diplomats, but anyone working in cyberspace needs to have access to information about best practices and a way of linking to other people working in this space who can engage them. And so we have a portal, the Sybil portal, SYBIL, where countries and organizations, nonprofits, providing information about the capacity building work that they're doing, including a number of really quite helpful tools that exists, and within that some courses and opportunities that can be accessed from around the world. So I very much encourage anyone on this call to go to civilportal.org and check out what is there. Because I think increasingly, as has been said, we need to take a conversation that's really been had among cyber capacity building professionals and reach out to other communities of practice. And among the first that we need to engage more with is the international diplomatic community.
Thank you so much. We just put the link to the Civil portal also here in the chat on Zoom, so you can check that out. What I find interesting, we seem to be crystallizing the discussion around two very broad questions. A, how do we find the right information to make an informed decision about which courses to take? And then how do we acquire the resources, both in terms of funding and time, to actually take the course? And that's at least from my perspective. But Catherine, we also had a very lively debate.
Can I just make one important point? I wouldn't like people to go away from this thinking that the only way that you can build your expertise as a cyber diplomat is by doing courses. There's an enormous amount of information you can go out and read and understand. Ultimately, courses are really important, but I think for those people who are interested in getting into this space, don't wait for a course, get yourself more knowledgeable, and you will be in a better place to benefit from those courses.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agreement. I also saw my colleagues Stephanie and Maria nodding quite vigorously. Absolutely agreed. But what I was saying before, we also had a really exciting, very lively debate in the chat here. So I'm turning to my colleague Andrijana Gavrilovic to give us a sense of what we've discussed in the chat and perhaps some of the questions that came up that we should bring into this discussion with our speakers. Andrijana, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kath. The discussion has been lively. It's not an exaggeration, and it's not just something that I'm saying just to say it. First, Dr. Jovan Kurbalija stirred up the chat with a question. Whom were the countries calling yesterday when WhatsApp went down for 6 hours? And what do we do when digital critical infrastructure goes down? Marilia noted that we need to know and understand the landscape and have the clarity about the roles and responsibilities of different actors. And this is something where capacity building can come in and help. Then we discussed, can we use different platforms for contingency purposes? And we decided that if you're just sending messages, it's fine if you switch to WhatsApp to Viber, but if you are a small business, then it's much harder for you to switch from Instagram, where you're selling, to another platform. Another question that was posed, but it was also answered in the chat, was, isn't it a problem that there are too many trainings and too many opportunities? How can diplomats know which one are the best ones for them? And what if it's a too technical training for a diplomat? It was also noted that sometimes it's hard to decide taking training courses that are offered by private actors because there could be an agenda and that could create a problematic sort of relations. Stephanie said that it's relative to the practitioner's work and level of expertise. When you look at our database, we did not get the impression that there are too many trainings. It's rather that people don't know about the existing opportunities, which is very telling about the need to raise more awareness. Camilla asked, in the study, is there any information available of the training provided by MFAs directly? Or shall we assume that MFAs are taking advantage of the resources available? And Stephanie said that MFAs trainings is usually communicated internally with their staff with no public information, so it is not included in our database. What we discussed in the chat, as you did as well, is how to Google trainings. And Stephanie did add, what are the training opportunities that are popping up in the search results? What is missing? How can organizations make sure their opportunities are more visible? And Rowena said that perhaps they can use search engine optimization techniques to improve website traffic and visibility. Julio Antonio asked, why should developing countries also have diplomats familiarized with cybersecurity? And we also had a question regarding yesterday's incident. It shows a needed collaboration between nation states and private actors, in this case, big tech. So what could a collaboration between those two actors look like? There have been messages in the chat while I was reading these ones out. I hope that I did manage to summarize what happened previously, and I hope that our speakers can jump in the chat and see if something in the last 2 minutes piqued their interest. Back to you, Kat.
Thank you so much. This is not an easy task, because the messages have been basically flying by in the chat. So thank you so much for the summary. I would like to give our speakers basically one last round of comments to react to the summary Andriana just provided, but also this question that she just highlighted. Basically, if it's about collaborating with the tech sector, how do we do that? And perhaps in the context of our discussion, how can our capacity development prepare diplomats to be more effective with this type of engagement? And then I would also like to give each of you the floor to perhaps give us a final word. Let's go in the same order as we started. So this would bring me to Ian for final comments and reflections on the whole of the discussion. Ian, over to you.
Thank you. This has been a fantastic discussion. I've been enjoying the chat. First, let me pick up sort of Jovan's point about the sort of recent incident. And I do not know the details. I ought to caveat what I say by that, but just generalize in terms of incidents. How is cyber diplomacy relevant to big cybersecurity issues? And I think the three areas I would highlight is one, there is a role for to the extent that these are malicious attacks, there is a role for setting up, deterrence, trying to prevent people from doing things on your networks. And I think there is a role for diplomacy in creating that deterrence. There is a need for resilience, often which comes from building relationships with other countries and making sure that infrastructure can be shared. There's building your capacity to respond, which often comes through capacity that comes out of trainings that have been offered as part of diplomatic relationships. And then there's, after an event, attributing attacks to further deter future attacks. So diplomats have a real role to play in sort of big cybersecurity. And I think we're going to see more and more of that going forward. The second thing I would say is that to a large extent, we're making this up as we go along. And to pick up some of the comments from the original presentations, we're going to need to get some feedback about what works and what doesn't work. So I very much encourage people who are sort of saying, what we have doesn't work, to get involved in organizations like GFCE, come to the table, say, this is what we need, this is what we would like to see more of, and help us iterate on products and courses and things that are engagements which are going to be helpful. Final thing I would say is that the way in which we think about this needs to be broadened, I think, not just to think about sort of training courses and how you can achieve knowledge within the space, but also how do we get news about what's going on. One of the challenges for diplomats is having access to the right information. And one of the things I think we ought to be looking at as capacity builders, and something that GFC takes very seriously, is, and I know Diplo does a lot in this space as well, making that information available to the community, including to diplomats, especially people who don't necessarily make all the conferences. And I think we're going to be looking at more of that in the future. I encourage more support for that from people who have that information to share.
Thank you so much. Over to Steph. What are your final reflections?
Thanks, Kat. I actually have three remarks, which I'll make them very quickly. I keep mentioning the databases of the training and tools, but so far I didn't say where to find them, and those are in the annexes in the study. So the link that we shared to the study there at the very and I would say the tools database is quite long because of the number of tools out there. So that's where to find them. But I'll also add, as was mentioned before, the Sibyl portal, it's a really great resource of training opportunities. And I would say a lot of the training were in fact featured on Sibyl, but also an excellent repository of ongoing projects related to cyber issues. And also the Digital Watch, great resource where you can access, as you were saying, the right information for on cyber diplomacy, and especially the section on cyber security, if we want to link this discussion to the cybersecurity aspects. So that's the first. The second is a reaction to what Marilia said, a very important comment from the experience on the e-commerce course, which is the fact that sometimes there's a misconception that you don't have enough time to take on a course, but in reality, once you start taking part in an online course, you actually find out that it's not that bad. So it's not that difficult to juggle, because the online aspect of learning gives you quite a lot of flexibility. And in fact, it circles back to one of the other findings that came out of the study, and that's the fact that most training opportunities we included in the database had the online component. So that was really, really good to see. Now, whether it's the result of COVID or whether it's the result of the gradual shift that everyone is making to online, but the fact is that most opportunities have the online component. So that's really helpful for everyone. And the third point I'd like to make is emphasizing what Ian said about the cyber diplomacy landscape, and especially the capacity development landscape being fairly optimistic. And I reiterate his call for everyone to get involved. And I can give one example, one very small example of how our involvement can make a significant difference for other practitioners. So talking about a training that you've taken, saying a few words about it out there on social media, etc., even though we're not required to do that, can really help other practitioners. Whether it's, for instance, I found time to do it, what Marilia said, or my experience was good or not so good, for instance. We rely on the peer review. We rely a lot. So why not talk about it? It doesn't have to be praise, far from it, but talking about it, whether or not you're really, even if you don't mention the course or the training, but you're talking about your experience of online training, that helps a lot. So it's a little bit that practitioners can do that can have a ripple effect, that can help other practitioners. And this is one of the many recommendations that will be included in the study, which we will share with everyone who has registered or participated in this webinar. So that's it from me, Kath.
Thank you, Steph. And then final words, over to you, Maria.
Thank you, Kat. Actually, I think I'm going to focus on two questions that I found very interesting in the chat. One, it was about courses that are not necessarily neutral. And I think that this is a real problem that we find out there, specifically in topics that are very polarized in terms of different policy positions. This is a case, for instance, of e-commerce that I'm working on. You have countries that are pro-free data flows. You have other countries that want to localize data. So you can imagine that providing a course that strikes the right balance between providing information that aims to clarify but not to make anyone's mind in one side or towards the other side, it's difficult. And I think that the scene for cybersecurity is becoming a little bit complex as well, especially because there is a growing polarization with US and allies on the one hand and China on the other hand. So it's very difficult, but it's very important that providers of capacity building try as much as possible to strike the right balance. It doesn't mean that a course will not be framed in a certain way. Every course, we prepare a course with people in mind. So for instance, our e-commerce course is prepared with developing countries in mind. So we are trying to cater for their needs, and we're trying to clarify and bring examples that resonate with them. So it's very important that people that take the courses also understand that. But on the other hand, it is true, and we saw this in our research on capacity building and internet governance, that when you have providers that have strong interest in the field, sometimes it is hard to take their courses because they do come with an agenda. So it's important for people to do a little bit of background research before they take the courses. And the other question that I found really interesting was about how new technologies such as AI impact the lives of diplomats. Will they need to have certain skills? Will AI not take over the job and do a lot of things for them? And I think that this is a very important point. The skills for diplomats of 10 years from now will not be the same skill sets of diplomats of 30 years ago. So we're talking about cyber capacity building today. However, the scope of different knowledge and courses that could be relevant to diplomats working on cybersecurity, for example, goes from cyber diplomacy, passes through artificial intelligence, and there's a very good course that we're offering on science diplomacy, which science is behind everything that we are doing right now, scientific developments and how to negotiate issues related to science in the international sphere will determine much of the development of technology in years to come and the geopolitical positions that countries will assume in this world. So I think that this diplomat will have a broader set of skills, and it's important to look at the capacity building landscape with this encompassing set of eyes and look for opportunities that will fill different needs in different moments, not focus on the file that you are working on at the moment, but try to have a holistic approach because digital technologies, they are deeply interrelated.
Thank you, Maria. Ian, I saw you reacting there. Do you want to add something real quick?
I want to add one very quick point, which I failed to mention previously, and that's to say that the one group who are more committed to helping cyber diplomats than anyone else are other cyber diplomats, not least because they've been through this experience and they really want to help. So if you are a cyber diplomat or if you work in a foreign ministry and you want to feel you need to get more clever on these subjects, feel free to go out, reach out to my government, US government, but there are many other governments who have been through this, maybe might feel they're slightly ahead of your government. Talk to foreign ministries. They're increasingly keen to help other foreign ministries get savvy in this space. You can engage with them through the GSCE, you can go directly, but I think there is an emerging community, and if you're looking for where to start, then reaching out through embassies or directly to foreign ministries is an extremely good way of beginning those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, there is an emerging and a growing community, as we saw here in this debate. So we ran a little bit over time, for which I apologize, but I think it was really important to get all the comments and questions into this debate. So first of all, I want to thank our fantastic speakers. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you about this important topic. I would like to thank you, our audience, for this tremendously interesting discussion that has been happening in the chat here. Very much appreciated. As always, we will follow up with the recording of this debate, but also a written summary. And as concerning the study, please have a look. We're also very happy to receive your feedback and comments and kind of enter a discussion with you and continue the exploration of capacity development in cyber diplomacy from here. This is just the start. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to our speakers. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.